So I know that there is an interest in Jewish writing and understanding the thought patterns among those who are not Jewish. And I'm talking specifically, of course, to Tammy and Eli, but of course to Gene, it's touching base with your heritage and all the work that goes into it. When in the course of taking Judaic studies at Portland State University, um, I really came to a better understanding of what it means to understand Jews and Judaism in a way that I never did before. You can go to a synagogue, you can attend all this stuff, you can attend the high holidays, and but if you are not raised in a Jewish household, you do not have the full impact of what it means to be a Jew. You are on a journey of searching, and only through study and understanding the writings that have impacted the Jewish people for thousands of years do you really understand and get a grasp. So to be able to work in the Jewish work, this is one of the things that I always felt that we fell short. You know, Sasha had this program where, Leslie and I went down to Florida and we participated with Jeff Rimsky and two synagogues there. And then we went up to New York and spent a week up in New York going to synagogues and spending time in the Jewish district. And this was all to enable us to be more effective in the Jewish work. And then I believe Denise and Gordon ended up going up to New York. They didn't go down to Florida. Um, and and that was a way of teaching it. But the problem is that going and seeing is impacts you, but you don't understand uh, the true impact of Jewish belief and thought pattern and the very definitive flavor, shall I say, of what it means to be Jewish. What does it mean to be Jewish here in the US versus in Israel or in Europe or in Russia? It's very, very different. East Coast and West Coast Jews and Judaism are completely separate. I was talking to Mark today about this uh, because he doesn't understand West Coast Judaism. And I'm speaking about Judaism as the religion. And he doesn't understand how, why, and we do things. And of course, he's in Baltimore, and he's really in a area that is very conservative or ultra. I would define him as ultra orthodox. He does not define himself as ultra orthodox, but on the West Coast, he would be um, almost Hasidic in how orthodox they are compared to here.
When
Um,
you say when you say East Coast and West Coast Judaism, are you talking about Orthodox Judaism?
I'm talking about Judaism in the United States as a whole. It is
Okay.
very different. When I say reformed in the East Coast, reformed on, let's say, I went to a synagogue, a Reformed synagogue in New Jersey, and it reminded me of going to Neve Shalom, conservative, the style of worship, the way they did it. Now they use the Reformed Siddur, which is the program guide, I would say, if I was to use the term, but the order of service. Um, but it was very much in their teaching, the prayers, very much lean. And when you go to, let's say, Beth Israel in Portland, it's very relaxed. And Beth Israel is a beautiful synagogue. I did a lot of work for Beth Israel. I wrote their grant to allow them to, as part of my Judaic Studies program, I wrote a grant for them to fix their dome. That dome that sits at Beth Israel literally sits on there and is not attached. And their synagogue, and it's beautiful. It's been used in many TV shows. It's used in Grimm. but several other TV shows. A classic synagogue, and I got to know the people there very well. I have their book on their history of them, but it's much more relaxed when you get to having discussions about what does it mean to be a Jew. It becomes much more cultural than religious. And then you go to humanist.
David,
Yes, yes.
I didn't understand what you said. Their synagogue is used in what?
It's been used in many TV shows because it's such a classic Jewish synagogue. It's got a dome. You walk inside, there's this beautiful glass. The arc is floor to ceiling. It's beautiful. It's in the round. Not very handicap accessible at all. That's one of the things they were addressing, and maybe by now they were going to do that. But how do they address it? And so that really started my journey. And then, of course, all of you know that I spent 3 months as the shamish at Neva Shalom. A shamish is the person that takes care of the synagogue. And that's what I did while my professor, the head of the Jewish studies, was in Europe on his sabbatical. And so I spent my time there taking, and that again was because Neva Shalom being open allows different different branches of Judaism to use their synagogue. So they had an Orthodox group come in from the East Coast, and I had to meet them at 10 o'clock at night and let them in and show them where they're going to stay. I didn't think about it. The woman leading the group, the rabbi's wife, the rabbi wasn't there. I didn't even think about it. I walked up and put my hand out. You do not do that. A man does not touch another married man's hand. Okay? In Orthodox Judaism, that is a big no-no. And I realized at the minute because she pulled her hand back, and I dropped my hand immediately and went, oh, I didn't realize they were Orthodox. I thought they were conservative, and conservative, they don't have that issue. It's not a concern. But I was very adjusted to how I approached them and showed them where they were going to be and where the men were going to be and where the women were going to be, and et cetera, as they were there traveling through. So I learned a lot about the idiosyncrasies of Judaism. And then we talk about the writings. And I took a lot of classes. I took one whole quarter in Josephus. I took a bunch of quarters in different varying writings. I took a couple Jewish literature classes, which were quite
David,
different. Yes.
the Neve Shalom, is that a conservative synagogue?
It is the largest conservative synagogue in Portland, in Oregon, probably in the Northwest.
David, could I add something?
Yeah.
So I was born in 45, and I was bar mitzvahed in 58 in the suburbs of New York in a Reformed synagogue. And at that time, most of the service was in English.
Right.
Some of it was transliterated. So years later, in the Bay Area, down in Palo Alto, I went to a Reformed synagogue. It was interesting. They had separated their services between the old timers like me and the younger people under 60 probably. So the older people, they had the services like the ones I had experienced in New York, where it was mostly English. But for the younger ones, there's a lot more Hebrew in the services. And I think it was because a lot of people felt they wanted more tradition in their services. So, I mean, this is just my guess, that the that the Reform rabbinate changed the services, at least in that synagogue in Palo Alto, just to accommodate the need to get closer to traditional Judaism. So that was one thing I experienced. The other thing is, I as a child, I would go to my grandfather's shul on Long Island in New York, and so that he was Orthodox, and so I got a feel for that when I was a child. And then I later I went to some Orthodox synagogues, just one, occasionally for a single service, but it wasn't. But I felt lost in terms of my connection with what I had felt as a child.
Mm-hmm.
But I went to Kessler, Israel, the Orthodox synagogue in Portland,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd gone to Chabad many times, not shouldn't say many times, but a fair number of times. But it was sitting in that one service in Kessler where I felt connected to the spirit that I felt back in New York as a child. Right. And it just felt, I could feel this connection back to through the generations, all the way back, that there was a thread existing there that I really didn't know existed. But it was just something inherent in me. I felt like a Jew, and when I walked out of the service, I felt this love for Jews that I'd never felt before. It was an interesting experience. And I walked around the streets of Portland looking for other Jews. I mean, I just, I wondered who they were. And I felt I could tell by looking into their eyes whether they were Jewish or not. So I just wanted to add that.
Did you go to Sherry Torah?
I went there 2 or 3 times. I saw it was much closer in terms of form to Orthodoxy, what they call it, traditional Judaism.
Traditional.
So it was, I think I went once or twice. I did not feel that same, have that same feeling that I did in Kessler, which is not to say it wasn't in Sherry Torah, but I just didn't pick it up when I was there.
Were you there at Sherry Torah before it became conservative, when it was still completely Orthodox?
No, I went, that's a good question. I went later because I think there was a woman at the Bima who was doing some of the prayers. So I assumed that was after. Yeah,
because they originally were Orthodox, and then they realized they wanted to loosen it, and I don't know if they officially became part of the conservative, but they while they still had separate seating, the separate seating was on the sides, and everybody else sat in the middle. So those who older wanted the Orthodox. And I would agree with you. At Neva Shalom, you can there's 3 different services running simultaneously. One that's 100% in Hebrew. One that is mostly English, but a lot of Hebrew, which is the one that runs normally in the big sanctuary. And then you have the one that is completely in English, and you are right. The completely English one is almost exclusively the older generation. The younger generation goes to the ones that uses transliteration, that uses Hebrew. And the one that's running Hebrew reaches Israelis, to be honest with you, because it's 100% in Hebrew. So if you don't understand Hebrew, you don't have a good understanding of Hebrew, you are really lost really quick. I've attended all three, and then they actually have a fourth one that they do that they call, I would define it as New Age, because it's really about I don't remember, they have a term for it, but it's about being in touch with yourself, feeling what's going on. And it's not really, it doesn't follow a normal Siddur pattern, so it's really kind of unusual. So it's very different. So these are the flavors of Judaism, and how do we experience them, and how do we understand them? And there, I wanted to start the Jewish writing class with a specific verse, specifically Exodus 24:12. Hashem said to Moshe, "Ascend to me to the mountain and remain there, and I shall give you the stone tablets and the teachings, the Torah and the commandment that I have written, to teach them." This is an interesting verse when you break it down, especially when you read it in Hebrew. It says, if we look at it in the English, it says, "I shall give you the stone tablets." That's one. The teachings, that's two. And the Torah. And in Hebrew, that Torah is in the plural form. The rabbis have said that because it was given in the plural, that this is the reason why we have both written Torah and oral Torah. Because Moshe spent 40 days there, and he actually did it more than once, spent time up there, and God taught him. Now, when we look at the Torah itself, it's all written out. And how do we then use written oral Torah? And that's one of the things we're going to explore in this class, is how do we use the writings and the Torah in order to enhance not only ourselves, but how we outreach. The biggest issue that I see in people who enter into a study at a synagogue, let's say they're Christians or they're Messianics, and they really delve into Judaism, is that they tend to be pulled into Judaism to the point the arguments, especially there are specific groups trained who specifically have great arguments as why Yeshua is not the Messiah. I mean, rock solid arguments that Christians cannot negotiate, and don't understand the Bible and the Torah well enough to even, and they know the New Testament very well. If you want to listen to someone, the person that I would recommend is Amy Jill Levine. Let's see if I can get where you guys can actually read it. This one happens to be short stories by Jesus, but she's also well known for a book we used to give out every time we held a seminar. Let's get it so you can see it. The Jewish Annotated New Testament. And she is a Orthodox Jew, a practicing Orthodox Jew, though she calls herself a non-Orthodox Jew because she is a woman who teaches. She is not allowed on the Bima at an Orthodox, or she's not allowed to read from the Torah scroll because she goes to an Orthodox and is married to an Orthodox woman, Orthodox husband. She is, however, she is the most persuasive individual as far as Yeshua. She speaks, and she was speaks at Vanderbilt University is where she taught, though she may have changed university since then. But when she spoke in Portland, at Portland State. They brought her in as a guest speaker, and I had a chance to really spend some time with her, speaking to her about Yeshua, and she's very well versed. She believes that Jesus was a very much a real person. He was very much a rabbi. He very much was as Jewish as it gets. And she doesn't have a problem with Paul. You know, most Jews, many rabbis have a problem with Paul. She doesn't have a problem with Paul. She has a problem with the translation and the understanding of how Christianity has treated these things. And this one on the parables of Jesus, which is one of my many source books for the podcast that I'm working on. She is very persuasive on how Christianity has taken many of these things and say they apply to the church, they apply to this, they apply to that. But here's the problem. All these things were spoken by Jesus and by Paul to a Jewish audience until Paul started speaking to the Gentiles, but he spoke to the Jews too. So whatever he said, a Jew of the first century would have to understand it. It couldn't be when they talk about the parables. Most Christian books on the parables, and I've got, I think, 15 now, by Christian authors of many, over 100 years worth of exposition on the parables. Most of them say that they're allegory. However, allegory is not a Jewish style of discussion. But it allows, when you give an allegory, you can say this means this and this means this, but no Jew would understand it that way, especially of the first century. And when you put the parables in their proper context, and that's what we're going to strive to do in this class, is we're going to try to put the material in its proper context so that we can utilize it. Not, well, in Gene's case, my case, it strengthens our understanding of Judaism, but it also appreciates what it is and how we can use it to influence others to the gospel message. I believe wholeheartedly that Jesus is and was the Messiah that all Jews have looked for. I don't know if you huh? Yes.
I want to ask you a really bad question.
Ask away.
Why? Okay, I don't know how to phrase this. Why, considering everything that Jews know about salvation, why is it necessary that they believe in Jesus?
They believe in a Messiah, right?
But why is it necessary they believe in Jesus as the Messiah?
Because the issue is one of salvation. Where is salvation held? Everything, when we look at the Torah, points to the ultimate redemption. And when we look at Yom Kippur, the sacrifices were given. And Yeshua is the ultimate sacrifice. He was the one to cover everyone. Up until then, it pointed to that. And those people, and you and I have this discussion, those people who, prior to the temple being destroyed, were able to do sacrifices that were substitutionary in their belief, their study, and their actions. And those substitutions were until the Messiah could die for each and every one of us. And so,
are you sure that Jews understand that Jews? Are you sure that Jews understand that the Messiah has to die?
Yes. Yes. And we're going to look at some of the readings. We're going to look at some of the readings on that. Go ahead, Gene.
Okay.
So Sorry, I have the same question Eli does. I'm not. I'm going to be very interested to see how you buttress.
We're gonna
Yeah.
look at the readings of specifically Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, Duties
Yeah.
of the Heart. It's a difficult text, and we may have to spend more than one session. And we are going to have to look at the work of what is his name? The one I gave you the name of, Susan Heschel wrote the book on. Hang on a second. Let me
Who? What?
Oh, I do remember. Jesus, the Jewish Messiah. And we're going to look at that because it's a foundation for reform. But we're going to look at that and how that works out. I don't know. Have you had a chance to read it, Gene?
No, I haven't.
You said you ordered it.
Is
but
there,
Is that
David?
who's the author?
Susan Heschel.
Oh yeah. I have that. I haven't read.
Yeah, that's okay. We're going to cover that in this course. Yes, Eli.
is there a one sentence answer to, so they know that the Messiah is going to die, but he's going to make them the bosses of everybody first?
No. Why would you think that?
Because many of the Jews that I've known think that they will be that all the nations are going to come to them and that they will be the ones in authority on the earth.
Okay. So I know where you're talking about. Because it says in the Torah that everyone will come to Jerusalem and worship God. All nations will come, right? That's the argument point. And I believe that's a misinterpretation. We can look at that though. I know where that comes from. I know where the rabbis pull from. And we're going to look at some of those texts. Now, I'm not going to say I have all the answers, but I do have a pretty good understanding of how the system works from a Jewish perspective, how the atonement system works and how the Messiah works, and why the Jews have always looked forward to a Messiah, right? And I'm gonna try and parse that out as we work our way through it. But we have to look at a couple foundational texts. We are going to look at the Talmud and parse some of those texts, which people. So this is an example of the single. I don't know if you guys can see it. The single best form of the Talmud. This is volume 1 of the Talmud, Tractate Bar Kokhs. I don't know if you can see that. My pronunciation is terrible. It's Tractate Genesis. Okay. The issue with this awesome Talmud, about $50 a book, and there are 72 of them. Okay.
It's not on
72
the
volumes.
screen. Is it supposed to be on the screen? Is it supposed to be on the screen?
No, I've just got showing it up on my picture. If you look at my picture.
Okay, yeah.
What's the title up on the top?
Schottenstein edition.
Schottenstein with 2 T's.
Oh yeah, here you go. Can you read that?
Yeah.
Stein.
This is the premier Talmud, Babylonian Talmud. Let me make that clear. This is not the Jerusalem Talmud. You can get the Jerusalem Talmud, and the Schottenstein is now putting out one. It's a version that is probably considered the best translated version. Though my teacher, Warren Spielman, Professor Spielman, he felt all translations were bad. He says if you can't read the Talmud in Hebrew, you can. And let's be honest. Sasha can't read the Talmud in Hebrew because Talmudic Hebrew is different than biblical Hebrew, and it's different than modern Hebrew, and it makes it it's a very, very difficult to read, and it uses multiple languages.
How much of it is in Aramaic?
A lot, and it's specific Aramaic. So I was having this argument with Professor Spielman, because we were arguing about whether Daniel was one book or three books, right? And my argument was because they think that the first portion of Daniel was written by Daniel, and the last two portions were not written by Daniel. And specifically, I was discussing the second portion where the language shifts, right? And that's their argument of why it is. And I said, because it switched shift to Aramaic. And my argument was, I says, you're a linguist. I says, that language is, that form of Aramaic was only used during the Babylonian time period. It was not used later. So you're telling me that they used 300 years later, they used an ancient form of Aramaic to write that.
Interesting.
And he went, I never thought about that. He says, I'm gonna have to give it some thought. He says, you made your point. He says, but I still think they're three separate books, right? I said, well, the other question I would, my other argument I would offer is the items taken from the temple. When we look at the description of the items taken from the temple, the way it is written is the same as writing of the earlier timeline. And of course, he's Reformed, but he's not he belongs to a Reformed congregation, but he's not a believer in God. He's an academic, 100% academic, brilliant mind, difficult to take classes from. I took my Josephus class and I wanted to quit. It was so difficult, but he's one of those that always challenges you, and that's all he cares about. I mean, he gave me a good grade, but boy, did he challenge me on every sentence. He challenged me. So how do we parse this? How do we look at it, and how do we utilize it? So some of the things I want to talk about in utilization of the Jewish writings in the Jewish work. One thing that has to be understood is Jewish thought. And this is why we have to study different Jewish texts, all the way up through, including, I'm not going to use it in this particular one, but they did use it at Neva Shalom, the Harry Potter Haggadah. It was funny as all get out, and my kids loved it. Right, they were still young when that came out, and they had this Haggadah that they used. Funny, but
what is that?
Huh?
What is that?
A Haggadah?
I mean, the Harry Potter one. What is that supposed to be?
If you know who Harry Potter is?
Yeah, but I don't understand how that relates to the Haggadah.
Because they used Voldemort in the place of Haman. They used so they used all the characters out of Harry Potter in it. It was very funny, and I laughed a lot during the whole thing. But
that doesn't say much about Jewishness, though, does it?
It thinks about it. It does about how Jewish thought process works, how they're willing to use anything to explain the story of Moses. But it is really understanding how do you think about your relationship with God. I can tell you that Christianity and Judaism have a completely different relationship in the thought of how that relationship works with God. completely different. And how do we do that? How you Eli have asked me many times. I don't understand why Christians don't go deeper and the Jews go deeper. And it's kind of the way that education is approached. It's the way it is dealt with. When you look at the commentaries, for example, on Rashi, when we look at Rashi, especially obviously the most influential rabbi ever outside of Jesus, the way he breaks things down, puts it together, makes you think about what you're doing in very small pieces. I don't always agree with the way the rabbis break it down, because they break this word and say those two go together. There's a lot of there that we have to look at, but it's that thought pattern. So as we go through these material, you're going to understand, you're going to get a flavor of how Jewish thought works. And that will give you a better understanding of even Jews today. Now, the other thing that we have to come to a very clear understanding is the history of Jews. And I'm not talking ancient history. Well, it might be considered ancient now, but from the turn of from the time of the temple being destroyed to now. You have to understand the whole history of what has happened to Jews, what made the shifts happen. And by understanding those shifts, we understand how diaspora worked, influenced the different aspects of Judaism and Jews. We begin to understand how they think and what the influences are on them. Why do Jews think that their history spans backwards? Why did Gene says he felt that connection going back and back and back? That is a connection between all Jews when they go in and they're in the proper services. We're also going to look at how writings have changed over the years. If I were to show you Rashi's material, early material, pre-Crusade and post-Crusade, you would think they're two different people writing it, right? The conclusions he draws, based on what happened to him and to the Jewish people, change his writings. When we look at Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, his is all about love. It's all about love. And it's the single greatest argument about for Jews. If most modern Jews understood Halevi's duties of the heart, there really is no search beyond that point. They understand the Messiah will come. They understand what it is, not what doesn't. When we look at Khazari, we're going to look at the logical arguments that Jews have given through the millennia about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That is what that book is about. It is a story told, largely considered fictional, but historical nonetheless. It came around the 11th, 12th century, about the Khazari kingdom converting to Judaism based on the arguments of the rabbi Yehuda Halevi on why Judaism is the one true faith and Christianity and Islam are false faiths.
Could you comment on what the Khazari itself is?
It's a book.
It's a book. It's a so it never existed. It's just a
No, it exists.
a what? It's a made-up story, right?
Yeah, it's a rabbi's way of explaining
Okay.
the difference between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. and it's his story using the story of the Khazari king and the Khazari uh, people, and this is an argument that is made as to whether they even really existed, um, and that's the argument among academics. Did they actually exist? Did this actually happen? And it really.
So, David, you would not consider this allegorical?
Oh, this isn't allegorical at all.
Okay.
Well, I guess you could say it is, but it was not written that way at all. It was written in Spain, and let me hang on a minute. Let me just flip to a page here. I got to get past all the internet work. Okay. So the biography. Okay, so I'm going to read you the opening paragraph. I was asked to provide refutations to those philosophers and religionists who dissent from us, including Jewish sectarians who dissent from traditional Judaism. This made me remember the arguments of the rabbi who studied with the Khazari king, who converted to Judaism some 400 years ago. The king's story is faithfully recorded in history books. It begins with the king having a reoccurring dream of an angel who appears to him and tells him, your intentions are desirable to the Creator, but not your deeds. The king had become deeply engrossed in the Khazar religion to the point where he himself would administer in the Khazari shrine and tend to the sacrifices which he did with a full heart. So that's the framework for the story. As I said, the question, did the Khazari exist? It's an argument that, but Yehuda Halevi is the one who did it. This was actually my third year Hebrew. I had to, from the Hebrew version, it was actually written in I forget what was the language used in Spain. It wasn't Spanish.
Portuguese.
Yeah, it's some other language. I'd have to think about it.
Portuguese.
It's Ladino.
That's
Yeah, it
it.
might have been Ladino. Anyway, Ladino is kind of a modern thing. But anyway, I had to translate it from the Hebrew, which was difficult. That was part of my third year history. It was translating that, and it took me forever. And I learned a lot about Hebrew. Yes.
I just want to make tell a little story about this, this question of Jewish thought. So I was not trained. I never went to a yeshiva, read very little Jewish writings, but I got into an argument with a older Catholic priest. He was teaching about Paul. And so I was questioning him about some stuff, and I kept questioning him. I think he was getting frustrated. And he did not know I was Jewish. Mm-hmm. And at one point he said, you think like a Jew.
Right.
And, it had a kind of negative charge to it, and I made a thing of it later, but it was interesting. I can't tell whether it was my thought process or my personality or what, but he was somehow picking up on this. So I think, it may be something that gets passed on.
I think it's very much something that's passed on. Yeah. Absolutely. I think it is a way of thinking, a way of thinking about education, is a way of thinking about how we look at things, and it's been ingrained generationally. Now, I talk to, for example, if you were to talk to my brother, there is nothing Jewish about my brother. Nothing Jewish about my brother. Not in the way he does things, but it's funny. when he thinks out things, it just comes out. It's weird. It's like, Dean, this is what I'm pointing to, it is, and I can't explain it. I can't explain it, but I know it when I see it. Format of the class. What I'm going to do, because I intend to record this, is I'm going to do a lecture on what we're talking about, and then we're going to have a question and answer. So, Eli, this is for you. I'm directing this at you. We're going to do a short lecture, and then we're going to discuss the material. And the reason why I want to do that, because I wanted to save the lecture portion, and I may use some of the question and answer. And then as part of that, we're going to have a thing of answering specific questions. Well, that's weird. It says we're going to go on a quest. Because there are many, I'll be honest, the more I learn, the more questions I have. And I keep searching for the answer. And it is part of what we are and what we do. And then how do we apply what we've learned to outreach? One thing in outreach is being empathetic, being able to have a conversation and not automatically jumping to a conclusion. I was listening to this revival, and the person speaking goes, Jesus went without food and water for 40 days. I says, it doesn't say that in the Bible. He goes, no, he fasted and went without food and water. I asked him afterwards. I didn't ask him during the series. I says, it doesn't say that. I says, you're thinking about Moshe. Moshe went to the mountain. It said he went without food and water. But it doesn't say that Yeshua did. Yeshua fasted, which was a typical thing at that time to fast during that time period, which we've already just come through. And he looked it up, and of course, he could not find where Jesus had drink water, because he doesn't say he did. It simply says, but he went right to, of course, Exodus says that Moshe was on the mountain, no food and no water for 40 days. So we're going to deal with specific questions. So, for example, Gene has asked me to direct deal with the question of kosher and the ruling that came from the Jerusalem Council about what was required was no circumcision, no drinking of, you didn't have to do circumcision, no drinking of blood, no eating of food to idols, and there was 3 things. I don't remember the third one off the top of my head. And then, but we're going to go back to an older form in Judaism called the Noahide Law. And I don't know if you guys have heard about that, but there were 7 specific things that were required if you wanted to become a ger, which is a first step into becoming Jewish. We're gonna talk about that on Wednesday, because the particular part of Acts 11, is actually quite short compared to the other one. It still deals with a lot of same issues, because he's dealing with the circumcised. It's what the circumcised group in Jerusalem. Peter is, and we're going to deal with that. And then I'm going to take that step into that next area about how does we reconcile the standard, and at what point is a person, does eating non-kosher food become a problem, right? Because when you read about it, it doesn't say anything about non-kosher. It simply says meat with blood in it, and which is offered to idols. Some very simple rules for the start of the process. Understand, conversion in Judaism has been the same for millennia. It's a 3-year process. If you were to go to an Orthodox synagogue and say, I want to convert to Judaism, after a long discussion with the rabbi, they would put you into class, and 3 years later, if you're a male, they would circumcise you. And I'm going to describe circumcision as a what would you say? Since most American men are circumcised, they simply take a needle and a drop of blood and blah blah blah, and there's a whole process for it. Women, of course, don't have to do that process, but men do. And then after 3 years, you are welcomed and are recognized if you're Orthodox in Israel to do Aliyah. If you do it in a conservative or reform, it is not recognized in Israel because of the way the political situation in Israel, and it creates all kinds of havoc. So that's what I hope to achieve through this class. I hope you guys are going to enjoy it. We're going to tackle some difficult subjects and we're going to have some fun too, because some of them I really love getting into Tevier the Milkman. And I don't know if you've ever really read it. It's quite intriguing. And when we're going to look at some of the more famous Holocaust writings. And they're important because understanding the impact of Holocaust on the Jewish psyche. This event this weekend is going to affect the psyche of Israel like 9/11 did to the U.S. They're no longer invulnerable. They're no longer, and they've taken over 100 people hostage. The last time Israel did a hostage negotiation, they gave 1,000 prisoners for one Israeli, and they have always felt that the people are important. I don't know how Netanyahu is going to handle it. I could see him doing something. Gene, you sent me a great article, but I could see Netanyahu doing something much more radically different. I could see him walking into Gaza and then arresting people and then taking them out and using them as a leverage point. Wholesale families, people. But the problem is Hamas doesn't care. All they care about is their agenda. And so it's a real big problem. So I hope that gives you an understanding. I'm going to try and get you the material for next week. Now that the high holidays are over, I can spend a little more time on getting stuff ready. And I won't be working. Yes, Gene.
I just want to ask you something about something you said that got me very curious.
I'm going to send you a PDF, which will allow you to use it on your iPad.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. That's great. Not tonight, but earlier you talked about the misuse of Jewish writings by Christian evangelists. And I was just wondering whether you could talk about that a little bit, or are you going to go into that some other time?
I'm not really going to go into it in our class, so I'll talk about it right now. I was at an evangelistic meeting, and the person presenting used a quotation out of the Talmud. I can find it to you and give it to you, but essentially he said, Jews do not study the end time events because the rabbis have said your bones will turn to dust if you study end time events. That's what he put on the screen, and that was his excuse. And I'm like, oh no, it was do not study Daniel because they don't want to understand end time events. And I'm like, I've got 4 or 5 Jewish books on the book of Daniel expounding on how it works. And I went and looked up the quotation in the Talmud, and in the Talmud it says, do not waste your time trying to determine when the Messiah will come, because before you can determine that time, your bones will turn to dust. Instead, prepare for the Messiah to come.
Right.
Totally taken out of context, right?
Right.
And I have seen that over and over when I listen to ministers and they quote the Talmud. I get so irritated because they quote it. I could do the same thing with the Bible. I mean with the New Testament.
Right.
Jesus said, "Hate your father and mother."
You know what? Everybody does that with everybody. I've learned not to listen to what somebody else says about a religion unless that person comes from that religion.
Yeah, but even Christianity comes from Christianity, and, and I say, well, if I can use that religion, I can use, well, we should hate our father and mother. Well, that means Jesus is non-Torah observant, because what is the 5th commandment? Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long upon the land, right? So obviously, and they use that as a point to say, look, Jesus wasn't had done away with the Torah. He didn't believe in it. And nowhere does it say that. He said that not one jot or one tittle, not one yod or one bob would disappear in that time frame. So, yeah.
I see.
But
So-
that's where I have seen it misused, Gene. Unfortunately, a lot. And unfortunately, because okay, so last week we talked about Peter, right, and the sheep. I
Yeah.
had a pastor here in town argue with it. That is why we can eat any meat we want because Jesus said it is not unclean. And then they couple it with the verse that that which you put in your mouth does not
Defile you.
defile you. Exactly. And it's a total misuse of the Bible. It's a total misuse of Jesus. But I see it being done with Jewish writing a lot. And some of it because they read something and they hear something and I mean some real top-notch theologians say some stuff. I'm like, whoa, where did you get that? You know?
You think it's
But
also
they do.
like a misunderstanding of reading it or not reading it in context?
Yeah, not reading it in its context, nor understanding the writing, nor understanding the style of writing. Or there are some rabbis that go off the rails. Don't get me wrong. There are rabbis that go off the rails, and they use that against Jews. Anti-Semitism, unfortunately, is very stronger today than it's been in a long time. So it is something that we have to fight against, that anti-Semitism in thought and language and action. Because if you don't, it's a problem.
I was
Yeah.
wondering why you think that is happening, because according to history, we're supposed to be becoming more tolerant, quote unquote, according to the sociologists and all these other people that keep telling us that, you know, we're taking all these classes and they're now required in college to in order to graduate, about acceptance and all this other stuff, and you know, for different kinds of people. And it makes me really upset because I see prejudice, racial prejudice all the time. I see prejudice against Jews. I see prejudice against Latinos and Mexicans all the time. I see this stuff all the time, and I don't know. Now they're changing and twisting everything to where now they're saying that when you, like when I see Tammy and I say, "Oh, Tammy, you look like an angel. You're so beautiful," because that's my impression. That means that I am using the same mechanisms that homosexuals use in their attraction to each other. Everything, I'm serious. That's what they're saying. I am. Everything is so twisted that I can't understand what's happening in the world. And I'm really getting confused.
I don't know that there is a clear answer for that question. Satan has an agenda. That agenda is to lead people away from God. Do I believe that tolerance should be taught? Yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% behind it. Tolerance, because if you don't, then unfortunately what is taught in the home tends to come forth out of these mouths. And I see a lot of so when I was young, I used to fight in the ring, right? My sparring partner, Leonard Alexander, was black. I obviously am not black. We would fight all up and down the West Coast and into Canada. And we would go to every tournament that we could fight. We fought full contact Taekwondo. And the black guys would give him, because of course we're athletes, we're traveling, it's expensive, we're both in our 20s and don't have a lot of extra money. We'd get one hotel room for both of us. And we traveled all over the US fighting. And he would get so much grief from black athletes about how he could spend a room night after night with me, and they all knew it because we hit more tournaments than anybody else on the West Coast at that time. And then got the same thing from the white guys. It's like, how can you stay with that black dude? I'm like, man, just step inside the ring and I'll explain how I can stay with that black dude. You know, I
Yeah,
got
but
very
wait till
angry
they
about it.
find out that you're Jewish, and then they go, "Ooh, a black and a Jew. We'll
Yeah,
kill both of them." You
yeah.
know?
Well, it was a problem. This was in the '80s, right? Uh, Layla knew me at that time.
Well,
Uh,
I
I
can
was a hardcore fighter.
I can tell you taking diversity classes now because I'm required to take them. They're not they're not really about tolerance and diversity except towards one class of people. And no, seriously. And they really
I
take
know.
victim mentality, and that you as a person are hostile if you deviate from that at all. So I mean, it's not diverse. It's not diverse at all. It's actually quite the opposite. So I have trouble taking those classes when I require.
Wokeness. It's the woke culture.
Well,
But I just want to mention, I'm sorry, Eli.
no problem.
So I had a friend. He was born in '57, Irish Catholic. Been a police. He worked as a policeman in Brooklyn for 4 years, but he had a BA and got a degree in chiropractic. And I remember once we were talking. He knew I was Jewish. He asked me in all sincerity. He said, "Isn't it true that Jews kill Christian babies to put in the matzah?" So it was unbelievable, to me to hear
That came
this.
up in the 1400s. We're actually going to look at one of those books where that came from, and still to this day, it still
Yes,
carries forward.
it's amazing.
Didn't Sasha say that too when he something about he believed that or they believed that I don't know, they were cannibals or something. I can't remember in his book.
Which book was this?
Sasha's book about something, I can't remember if it was the Christians or the Jewish, but that deterred him from going to meetings because he thought that he would, not survive.
You guys know that my mother told me that. She said, that Jews get babies, whether it's their own or others, and they kill them and they put their blood in the matzahs. And I had never ever heard anything like that. That was the first time I heard that. And I think I about had a heart attack. And, because they believe that the sacrifice, going up into the mountains, and he was going to sacrifice his son, that he actually did sacrifice his son. And that's what the Muslims believe too. That boy was actually sacrificed, and it was another boy that came down. And then they believe that Jesus didn't die on the cross, that it was another guy that died on the cross. And there's all kinds of mixing uppings.
It's remarkable. It's remarkable.
So the answer that I had for my mother is, it's quite the opposite. They are the ones that the Lord told to be kind to each other, and that they will not do the same things that the rest of the heathens did, and that they had to be kind not only to each other, but even to the animals.
Yeah. That whole blood libel thing. That's why, when I heard Margaret Taylor Greene mention blood libel, I about come off the floor. I'm like, are you kidding me? You don't even know it. And she didn't know what she was talking about. She didn't know what it was. But I mean, it's from the 12th century, and it still comes forward to this day.
Who's she?
She's a representative from the state of Georgia in the current U.S. Congress. But it's because of lack of ignorance on her part. She didn't even know what it was, and that's a problem with many people. They hear these things, and it becomes a problem. So we're going to explore those. We're going to explore some of those difficult subjects. I'm gonna try to keep the classes to an hour, if possible. We're a little over today, but that's okay. And if we don't finish the subject, we'll just continue on. Because some of them, like the Talmud, I don't have any idea how I could do anything close to justice in an hour. Just describing the page alone, and how you read the page and how you utilize the page can take me an hour before we even read a subject of the page. The layout's very important. So we'll look at all that. Let's end with a word of prayer. Our dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for all that you have given to us as we start down this journey. Give me wisdom to be able to teach it and do justice to the teachings of your people, the thought of your people, and in fact that you have always had guidance and held that thread together through the last 6 millennia. And so we ask for the guidance of Yeshua as we move forward. And again, Lord, I want to lift up Israel and keep your hand over them. I thank you in the name of your Son. Amen.